we can get everyone else in here too. More people I'm sure will show up, and then more people can watch the recording later. But yeah, so I'm gonna screen share because I've got a little slideshow
Oh, okay.
to hopefully help guide the presentation, because there's so much, right? So I was there for 13 days, and there was so much. Every day was packed. I mean, we spent at least 14 hours. Like sometimes it would be a full 16, and we would get back and get maybe 6 hours of sleep or something. But every day just packed full. And so before I left, we went over the schedule, the itinerary. So some folks are sort of aware of some of the things that I'm going to talk about, but the way that I thought of reducing it and making the content manageable, because I have pages and pages and pages of notes, was just to identify like the three main things, three, sometimes four things, if I just couldn't keep it to three, from each of the folks. And it's not actually everything. Not everybody is on here. Trying to keep it manageable. But so I'm just gonna go through and try to, as best as I can, communicate to you what was communicated to us. So some of it will be editorial, I'll be sharing my opinion here and there, but for the most part, I'm just trying to relay what we were told by our Palestinian siblings. And not everybody was Palestinian. There were some Israeli folks, there were Jewish folks, there were Muslim folks, but mostly Palestinian Christians. So this was a delegation of Presbyterian clergy. There were some folks who joined us from the United Methodist Church, and some lay folks. And so we were there to go and come and see and go and tell was the idea. So go to hear the witness of our Palestinian siblings, and then come back and tell everyone else about it. So that's what I'm going to try to do. So just to set context, I mean, of course, this Gaza has been the thing most immediately and in the minds of the world lately. 37,000 plus dead. I read some recent reporting that did some sort of speculative math, but it was compelling. It was reasonable and logical, and put the death toll somewhere between 200,000 to 500,000 for a bunch of reasons. This 37,000 number has just sort of been stagnant for a long time, but the infrastructure to identify the dead just doesn't exist. So the math that was done said that the death toll is likely much higher than this. But the UN says that 70% of the deaths are women and children, 50 to 61% of the building is destroyed. Starvation, right? Medical facilities overwhelmed and under-resourced, and stories are accumulating of torture, rape, execution in prisons, the use of dogs in warfare to run into houses and and tear people's bodies apart. There's 9,500 prisoners that are being held in Israeli jails since, and that was the number back in April. Aid is blocked and insufficient. And there's this line from a CNN reporter who said, when she went to visit, that she saw the death of the human soul in Gaza. And every day I think I see maybe a dozen different videos, mostly of children, of their bodies dismembered, their flesh in ribbons. If their parents are alive or around, their parents like screaming and writhing in agony over them. So this is the context, right, of Palestine and what most people are thinking about. But we were in the West Bank, which is another part of Palestine. We were in Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. And so Gaza was heavy on everybody's hearts. But they were also trying to say that the project of occupation, of Zionist expansion, is not actually the political machinations aren't actually focused on Gaza. The interest in settling Gaza isn't extremely high. It hasn't been systematic, in terms of the attempt to settle it for very long, just to sort of make sure that the animals are in their cages and are being obedient That's sort of been the idea behind Gaza. But the West Bank is where people are experiencing right settlement and experiencing the straightforward clashes with the IDF and with settlers every day. And so that's where we were, and those were the people we were talking to. And so our trip was facilitated by Seil, which is a liberation theology center in Jerusalem, Palestinian liberation theology. So Omar Harami is the director of Seil, and he led a lot of our trips. There were a few different tour guides, but he was the main one, and he's a brilliant, brilliant guy, just incredible. He's also hilarious. Like he would have like the mic at the front of the bus and just have us in stitches like the whole time. And like the IDF soldiers would get on the bus like to harass people, and he would be like, like jabbing at them and going back and forth and like trying. He would explain to us like it was a way of trying to recapture some power in that encounter by having these like little ribbing sessions with them and going back and forth and trying to reclaim some autonomy and agency. But he was just brilliant at navigating all these really complex situations. But so he communicated the three pillars of Seil, of their organization, which is inclusivity, that all are seen and loved by God, justice, and a justice which isn't just looser chains or a cleaner cage, but the abolition of the cage, and their commitment to nonviolence, believing that they can fight evil with good and succeed by the grace of God through the Spirit. And their sort of political platform, it was interesting. I mean, maybe these should be the other way around, that what they were advocating for was the recognition of international law, of trying to get Israel to comply with just the basic tenets of international law and what the international community has asked of them. So they don't have a radical agenda. There's folks in the Palestinian resistance who have a lot more radical ideas about what should be done about the occupation, but they're happy with the two-state solution, though he also, I put this little note in there that he's also an advocate of no countries, no borders. There are a few folks have some of these anarchist tendencies, but what they're advocating for, in terms of their platform as an organization, is the recognition of international law, the two-state solution, and international law being that common reference point that can hopefully be used in negotiations. And so that's sort of the framework of this organization. And we had Jonathan Katab, who's a human rights lawyer, founder of Al-Haq, co-founder of Seil, Nonviolence International, board of Bethlehem Bible College. And he was saying that, under the cover of the genocide, that the occupation is worsening and accelerating at just a completely unprecedented pace. Everything is completely locked down in Palestine. The security infrastructure, which already is so intense and so expansive, has tightened its grip even more fiercely since the start of the genocide. He said that he's hopeful long term, but that he has a sense that in the short term, that Israeli revenge for October 7th, right, is the reality. And that the re-election of Netanyahu is impending, and if not him, it will be someone worse. In his estimation, he thinks that Netanyahu just isn't prosecuting the war or Israel's interest in the way. What is that? Who's singing? Yeah. What is that?
Israeli interference.
I think that's Anne, but she's muted now.
Okay. So yeah, he said something that was kind of enigmatic to me. I mean, he was saying to reject branded solutions. I think he's one state, two state, and saying, he was telling us to focus on the elements that would constitute whatever the final just thing would be. And to not, I think he was saying, to strategically not align ourselves too closely with any option that has like a kind of, a camp that is devoted to it, but to be flexible and to align ourselves with whatever solutions are going to focus on demilitarization, on equality and human rights and freedom of movement. And so sorry, I'm watching a kid. No worries, and we totally get it. Thank you for being here. So yeah, so that's what he was sharing with us. And we started off in Jerusalem. So this was our time in Jerusalem. Then we met with Chasa Catz, who's a Jewish Israeli. She's part of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. And so we went around and looked, we got on the bus and went to a ton of sites to look at settlements, to look at demolition sites, and to get these really like large scale views where we could see like the whole city, or just outside the city to see and she had all these maps to show us what the plans for settlement and occupation looked like. So the population of East Jerusalem was 66,000 in 1967, and it's quadrupled since then, while land access is winnowing to nothing. So only 13% of the land is now allowed for development by Israel. So it just keeps getting smaller. So now it's down to 13% of the land. So there's a bunch of different designations that the state puts land into, different categorizations. And so, of course, they're making these stipulations on Palestinian land in East Jerusalem, saying that you can use this land for development, 13%. This land is going to be a green zone. This land is going to be dedicated to Israeli settlements. And so they're making these determinations about Palestinian land over which, Israel has no sovereignty. But so as a population is quadrupling and continuing to increase in size, their access to East Jerusalem is narrowing to next to nothing. And they can't build even if they did have access. So on that 13% of land, what can you do with that? Well, it's really difficult to build. Building permits are around $30,000, translated from shekels. And 98% of those applications for a permit are rejected by the Israeli authorities, and you don't get that money back. So, as Palestinians, which we'll get into later, make very, very little money. So to come up with 30K to try to expand your home when, generations, your kids are getting married and they're having kids, and, your home no longer accommodates everyone. You basically can't build. Over 50,000 homes have been systematically demolished. And when they're demolished, Israel charges for the service. So you often get Palestinians who will demolish their own homes because they don't want to have to pay the Israeli state to do it for them. Let's see, there's another comment in here. Nate, yeah, look at Nate's, whoops, let's go back. Nate's link, thank you for that. So she showed us maps that chart the plan for totalizing settlement and suffocation. And so that's really the way that all of these settlements work, like whether it's in East Jerusalem or elsewhere, or just like out in the hill country, is placing settlements around Palestinian enclaves. So Palestinians don't have contiguity. They can't get through to the other side. They can't move through the settlement, of course. And so they, trade is difficult, travel is next to impossible. And she said, as a Jewish Israeli, that mainstream Israeli politics desires a unified Jewish Jerusalem. So this idea that eventually all of Jerusalem will be Jewish, and there won't be an East Jerusalem that is Palestine or that's populated by mainly Palestinians. So that's the long-term goal in her estimation. We also visited with Bishop Yunan, who's the bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jerusalem. He said that Christians in 1948, right before the founding of Israel, constituted 12% of the population, and now there's less than 1% because of occupation in his mind. He said, this is a quote from him, that the fascist government can take your home and your children, and fanatical settlers can kill you and move in. And so he said that no one except the most resolute want to live here, right? Like under these conditions, it's so difficult to live, to have an enjoyable life, one that's, so constantly under threat of violence from settlers or from soldiers or from your house being demolished, where like life, even if you're not experiencing acute violence, is just still so sort of flat and, and stultified and empty, that the only tie is just this word samud, this like steadfastness, this commitment to Palestine as a home. But it's not that it's particularly enjoyable to be there these days. So lots and lots of people are leaving. And that's part of the goal of Israel, to make life unlivable so that people will move away. And he expressed that he was just tired of being ignored by Christians in the West. He said he'd been in the US so many times to speak to Congress people, to advocate at various levels of government or different NGOs, and has just given up. He said, I'm not going back. Like, I'm not making that attempt anymore. And we had people in our group who, are part of Church Witness, like for Congress or, different places. And yeah, they're pretty taken aback by that. But he was like, I've been doing this a long time, and our Christian siblings in the West just don't care and do anything to support us. And so I'm giving up. We went from there to the Armenian quarter of Jerusalem. And it's this group of young folks, young Armenian folks who are resisting an illegal sale of their land to settlers. So there's this kind of one of the primary issues in Palestine has been these absentee landlords that sell off property that Palestinians are living on, but they'll sell them to settlers because, so settlers can, marshal a lot of resources and make good offers. And so there was a sale that these folks believe was illegal. And so they have a 24/7 presence on, it's their church property. And so it's a bunch of young folks who've camped out in this kind of makeshift, dwelling, and frequently, have to go out at night and directly confront settlers who are trying to establish control of their land. But just a handful of Christian Armenian families are left. So they're kind of the last holdouts there, trying to stave off the settlement of the Armenian quarter. We spent some time with JLAC, the Jerusalem Legal and Humanitarian Rights Center. So they talked about how the avowed goal of Israel is the accomplishment of a particular demographic split, which is 70-30, with 70% being Jewish and 30% Arab. And so for, some set of reasons and logics and a rationale, they think that will be a sufficient supermajority to ensure that Israel remains a Jewish state, right? That some Arabs happen to live in, but is not actually their national home in the way that it would be for Jewish people. And so they'll feel comfortable with the 70-30 split. But at the moment, it's 58-42. And Arab Palestinians and Israelis are having children at higher rates than Jewish Israelis are. So they have to resort to some of these other techniques of bringing that, that demographic split down to a place that's more comfortable, by making life unlivable, by indirectly getting people to move away, by forcibly displacing them, by all the different techniques, of occupation to bring that number down. So 1/3 of the Palestinian population in Jerusalem lives on 5% of the land in Jerusalem. So they're just crushed into these little, and of course, like I was just saying, they can't build, they can't expand, on their own dwelling. So they just keep, the next generation has kids and they're growing exponentially, but they have less and less land to live on and no ability to expand. There are now 251,000 Jewish settlers in East Jerusalem, which again is Palestinian territory under international law, and the settlers are there illegally.
So, Connor, if there are 7 million Palestinians, does that mean 2 million Palestinians are living in 5% of Jerusalem?
Mhm.
Well, one third of the Jerusalem Palestinian population.
Oh,
Not
okay, okay.
Yeah,
Not the entire Palestinian population. Okay.
right. One third of the Jerusalemite Palestinian population. Yeah. So they called this the silent war, right? So like you have some of the more spectacular, or acute kinds of confrontation, with the guns and obviously what we're seeing in Gaza. But this is the silent war that's been going on, for a very long time and is continuing. So about 1,500 new units are needed for Palestinians each year, and 125 are approved by Israel. So of course, that doesn't at all keep up with the demand, and that the difference increases each year as it compounds. So there's this E1 master plan that's been drawn up by the state of Israel, is available on its websites. And what our Palestinian guides were saying is that it would cut off any possibility for the development of a Palestinian capital, and would stab the two-state solution in the heart. Or he then kind of qualified it and said it would be the headstone of an already dead solution. But so the idea of settling East Jerusalem and Palestine generally to the point where there is no Palestine, right? I mean, when you look at the map of Israel Palestine, we were talking about this at breakfast this morning, it sort of looks like it's vaguely 50-50, in terms of the broad borders. But once you go in and look at the settlements, it's just these tiny little dots that are Palestinian enclaves, and the settlements take up all of the space around them. So the West Bank is actually not deeply Palestinian, as we'll continue to see. So what are you supposed to do with the 700,000 settlers in the West Bank? Right, they become facts on the ground. That once you start talking about a two-state solution, you start having to say, well, it means we'd have to expel, or ethnically cleanse, 700,000 Israeli Jewish settlers somewhere else in order to constitute a Palestinian state. So obviously that problematizes the process. What's going on? Okay. So yeah, we were also taken to the wall, the so-called apartheid wall, which separates Jerusalemites from Jerusalem. So the wall runs in this in a way that has a rationale according to the settlement process, but not a legal one, right? So the wall will run right through Jerusalemite Palestinian communities, putting them on the other side of the wall, meaning that they receive the services of the municipality, but they'll continue to pay taxes to Jerusalem, and then they'll have to go through through the checkpoints. They'll have to spend hours every day going through checkpoints to get into the city of which they are residents. And there are multiple different kinds of residencies. Like being a Palestinian Jerusalemite is a particular category of Palestinian. There's a different set of laws and regulations that apply to them, and then a different set that applies to those in the West Bank, a different set that applies to those in in Gaza. And then within that, there's areas A, B, and C that are different sets of laws that apply. So there's so many layers of legal handcuffs that continue to subject Palestinians to the inability to just like live life. And we'll continue to see that unfold. We went to in Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem, this neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, which some folks might have seen before in the news. It was pretty popular a little while ago. I just want to show you a quick video. And this we went to the home right next to this place. Hopefully y'all can see this.
You are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
No one is allowed to steal it, يا عمي. Jacob, this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? What are you yelling at me? I didn't do this. It's easy to yell at me, but I didn't do this.
You are stealing my house.
I gotta go. It's driving me nuts. Oh. The same as rather than today.
So just
Yeah.
sharing that because we were just right there, and that that street has there's tons of settlers on that street now, and it's those ones are like covered in Israeli flags. And yeah, and have like a security presence around them. The settlers carry weapons and the soldiers do. We went to Seil 1 where there's been a ton of demolitions and new settlement construction. These eyes are the eyes of Seil 1. They're watching the occupation advance.
So Connor, what percentage of the settlers are American?
That's a good question. I don't know, but it was such an odd experience to be walking through like the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem, any of those places, like obviously like you saw with Yaqub, that they all have American English accents. Because walking through Jewish Jerusalem and only hearing, American Jewish accents, it was really interesting. So yeah, we went to
God, it makes me wonder how much American racism plays into all of this.
Yeah.
Exported that way.
Don't need American racism, they have their own. Racism is racism, they don't have to have it defined by us.
Yeah, so we went to Nablus, and we went to a church that one of our Peace USA churches has been in relationship with for 17 years. They have a kind of exchange program. They have Palestinians come and stay with them, and they go and visit. And so at that church, the IDF, just a couple days before we got there, had like broken down their doors and destroyed a bunch of their property inside in the middle of the night. And no one really knows why. They did it to the business that rents from them below. And then after we left, they went back and destroyed parts of the church again, and destroyed the restaurant that we ate at, which our Palestinian folks said they do as retaliation when Palestinians host groups, from the outside. Settlers and the soldiers will come in and destroy their stuff to like punish them for that. So we went to Jacob's Well, which is one of the oldest sites, like Jacob's Well, where Jesus met the Samaritan woman. And we met a priest there, wonderful guy. And he pointed to 2 tank shells, divots in the building where it had been shelled by tanks, 56 bullet holes. He said a priest had been killed there by settlers, and that many attempts had been made on his life. And then when we tried to leave, we had to wait for 3 hours at a checkpoint. Because Palestinians were on our bus, they made us go off to the side and made us wait for 3 hours. And eventually they wouldn't let us through. And so we just had to go around to a bunch of different checkpoints until they just waved us through, thinking we were just without Palestinians on board. We went to Ramallah, and Sam Bahor, the founder of Paltech, and he has, a bunch of things he's worked on. Talked about the economy of Palestine, how little autonomy they have, how dependent they are on Israel for imports and exports. Palestinian GDP is 19 billion, which is 3% of Israel's GDP. About 3,700 per capita versus 58,000 for Israelis. And all of the worst, most toxic industries are put in Palestine, and they function as a reservoir of cheap labor for the Israeli market. We went to Sinjil, which is a village outside Ramallah. They said that 40% of their village had been confiscated by settlers, and that only 10% was actually that they could move freely through and move and plant and things like that. Said every night settlers attack, burning trees and crops, stealing animals, and every day someone is killed. And we went out to with some Bedouins. So Bedouins are folks who are mobile, who are itinerant. They like move with tents, and they have historic places, pasture lands that they've been grazing for thousands of years. But now that settlers have taken control of those lands, they have nowhere to graze their animals. So we went out to talk to them and hear from them about how Palestinians enforce you know, those terms. We went to church. It was really beautiful to get to go to church in Ramallah, and it was beautiful. Parts of the liturgy were in Aramaic. Our bus driver was Syriac Palestinian Christian, and he prayed the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic, and it was so beautiful. Like, you know, like that's the language that Jesus prayed that prayer in originally. And so to hear, you know, from the living stones, you know, from the people who have been here since the very beginning, you know, less than 1% of the population now, but trying to keep the faith and worshiping with them. And they actually used English in part of their liturgy, which they never do, but they did, like, for us. They didn't know we were coming, but like worked it in to just like welcome us a little bit. That was really cool. And then we went to Bethlehem, and saw the apartheid wall there too, and you know, the graffiti on it and the forms of resistance that take place there. Of course, the Great March of Return in 2018, where, you know, where Palestinians marched for a couple of years to just be, you know, to march for their rights, for their right to return, to just be shot at, you know, with children and disabled people being targeted, and one soldier bragging of shooting 42 knees in one day.
Oh,
They're, you know, one of their big nonviolent movements that just, you know, simply didn't go anywhere because we didn't pick it up to support them. So we went to the WEAM, the Palestinian Conflict Transformation Center, and the guy there is a Palestinian Christian, and he was using this language of being living stones, which almost everyone used that language, that we were living stones and not museums. People come to these different sites to see, like, oh, this is where Jesus was born, or this is where this thing happened, as if it's all dead, you know, as if it's resigned to, you know, to history and not something that's living and present, that Palestinian Christians are still alive and fighting for their rights. So you have to remember that we're living stones and not museums. He was married to an American woman, but she hasn't been allowed to be legally unified with him. So they're in Bethlehem, which is in Palestine, but Israel won't let her legally unify with her Palestinian husband. So she has to leave every 3 months. And they've been married for over 30 years. And so every 3 months she has to leave because Israel won't let her unify with her Palestinian husband in Palestine. So they talked about the military courts there. You know, civilians don't have access to civil courts. You know, if Israel or an Israeli settler has, you know, some claim against them, they're tried in military courts, which have a 99% conviction rate, where children are tried, where administrative detention is used freely. Administrative detention being, you know, being held without charge or trial. And there are 120,000 settlers now in Bethlehem, which is a very small place. We went to Norweg, which is the women's empowerment group in the Aida refugee camp. And this was one of the most striking things, I think, of the whole trip was observing Palestinian disability. You know, and we had some older folks with us who had some trouble with some of the steps and this or that thing, but we were very comfortable for the most part. But thinking about what life is like, you know, there were people in wheelchairs, there were folks with developmental disabilities, there were people who like had diabetes and they had, like, a, you know, patch on their arm. There are people who were blind, you know, all kinds of different disabilities, and thinking about how difficult it is to navigate that, or sickness, right? Like, even in our own society, as advanced as it's supposed to be, but how Palestinians have to navigate disability under occupation with so little, and just like how extreme that challenge is. It was beautiful to go and get to be with those folks, and we made a meal together and got to know some really wonderful people. So that place, that refugee camp, is refugee families from the expulsion in 1948. So they've been there since then, and they could each point to the village that they were expelled from in 1948, and all, you know, desire to go back. There was a little, you know, in someone's home, a kind of gift shop on the way out, and they sold earrings made out of tear gas canisters that were made in Pennsylvania, which are, of course, the canisters that the Israeli government uses against them when they demonstrate. Sort of a weird thing, I don't know, to like wear the bits of the tear gas canisters around, but like the symbol is really powerful. And then we went up to 10 of Nations with Dawood, who has some kind of, you know, like his story has made the rounds in some international media. It's this 36-year legal battle to prove ownership, because part of the problem, right, is that people just lived on these lands. And then when Israel showed up, especially after 1967, they started demanding proof of ownership of these lands. But it's like people didn't have like a state apparatus, right, or a legal apparatus. They didn't think about property in terms of real estate and deeds and things like that. So for tons of these Palestinian families, they weren't able to prove their ownership. They just lived there for generations. And so Israel was able to come in and say, actually, you can't prove you own this. So now that we're here, we own this. So they've been on this land for generations, and have the past 36 years have been an acute and protracted legal battle to try to secure ownership. But this massive settlement is encircling them, getting closer and closer. And it had, huge apartment complexes and swimming pools and, and like a school, and you can like hear, the kids playing in school. And they went and drove up it's across the valley. It's like surrounding on every side, but the settlers drove an RV up and camped it right at the edge of their property, just to be right there, just to say like, here we are. And right as we left, they started laying gravel to build a road like through their property. As with all Palestinians in the West Bank, they're not allowed to collect rainwater or dig wells. And so have swimming pools, they have all the water they could ever need. But they have to get water in big tanks, and it's very expensive, and they don't have access to the natural forms of water, that has sustained them, of course, for generations. We went back to Jerusalem. We went to this interfaith march for peace and human rights, which was interesting. It was like we marched and we had this sign that was like just black and white. Like it just said that, like, and there's no sort of exposition on what that meant, like peace and human rights. There's like a rabbi there with like IDF dog tags on. So it was like, okay, peace and human rights, but like, what are we talking about? But people got together and were able to feel kind of like connected. We sang songs and stuff. We had a woman with us, an Armenian Christian woman, who's 91 years old, and she was born in Jerusalem, and she was amazing. She was like maybe the highlight of the trip for me. And she got up to speak, and she was like, I lived here. She would remind everybody we encountered that she was older than the state of Israel. And she was like, I lived here. And she was like, we had Jewish friends over here, and we had Christian friends over here, and we had Muslim friends over here. And then in 1948, something changed. And she didn't like name explicitly what that was, but it was obvious what it was. And she was like, we need to get back to that, to us all being able to share this land, and feel a common sense of belonging and ownership. And it was really beautiful, and got by far the most applause and most energy, is like saying something like that, which I thought was really powerful, and maybe speaking to a tiny little current, maybe, of Israeli society that might be sympathetic to that. We went to a Dabki workshop, which is traditional Palestinian dance, and that was like really beautiful and powerful. And then we went to Hebron. We went to the Cave of the Patriarchs, which is where Abraham, Jacob, and Sarah are supposed to be built. I think just Jacob and Sarah are supposed to be buried, and so it's partitioned, and there's like a Muslim side and a Jewish side. Can't see, like, when you're looking kind of into the tomb, and the Muslims have their side and the Jewish folks have their side, and there's a piece of bulletproof glass also separating, so one can like shoot in between, because an Israeli settler in the 90s went in and shot over 100 Muslims while they were worshiping. And so now there's this like massive security presence, but it means that Muslims can't like worship in private, and the security presence is Israel, right? It's IDF soldiers. It's not like their own security. So we went in there and experienced that. Well, we were trying to talk with the Palestinian woman who was our guide. Settlers came and approached us, and we're like yelling, yelling at her, yelling at us, saying like, and they're armed, they have guns, and the IDF soldiers are just right behind us, and yeah, and they were all like yelling and interrupting her, and one guy kind of forced his way in and was like giving his side of the story. And we listened to him for a while, and then we moved on. But they followed us, and the settlers followed us, and the soldiers followed us, and they could move wherever they wanted, following us and harassing us down the road. But the Palestinians with us couldn't. They kept being stopped, and they had to stop at a certain point and couldn't go on with us. But the settlers could go wherever they wanted, of course, as illegal settlers in Palestine, in Hebron. So there's, huge settler soldier, limited movement, and no economy,
She
especially.
might need to go out. She was, I don't know.
We had been.
She
we
had,
were-
was standing to get off the bed.
Can everybody mute, please?
Yes.
Connor, as the organizer, I think you can actually mute everyone.
I
Yeah,
know,
Connor,
I'm
you
like-
can mute the group.
The whole group.
I think so.
Yeah.
If you're leading the meeting.
'Cause I don't know. Like I can mute individual people, but I don't know who's making the noise. I don't know how to do the whole group.
I think
But-
it's from Patricia Rock. Are you guys having a little chat back there?
But it sounds like
Who's all over there?
We're not having a chat.
No? Who's
No,
talking?
we're not having a chat.
it was someone else. I think we're okay.
No, somebody else.
So,
Oh.
so yeah, we went down Shahada Street, which used to be this bustling, economy. It's now completely shut down. Israeli flags are planted all over all the closed businesses. It's a ghost town. The Arabic on the sign has been scratched out, and replaced with Hebrew. And there's big, Stars of David everywhere, and billboards like advertising settlement and Judaization of Hebron, and pushing Palestinians out. So these are in Hebron. So these are like what the soldiers look like. So like the stop, like that's what that looks like. That happened a bunch. They would stop the Palestinians. They'd ask us all like our religion, and we could kind of move on. We said we were Christians, but if they were Palestinian Christians, they had to stop. And then these are what the settlers, and they just walk around everywhere, like in Jerusalem, like just every day. Like this, they're not out to like do anything in particular necessarily. That's just like the daily loadout, as they go out with the guns, and settle Palestinian homes and put Israeli flags everywhere, and then the soldiers come up to like protect them from the Palestinians, because of course they've taken someone's home. So I have like a few clips, but I want to make space for conversation. So maybe I'll wait to see if there's a lull in conversation, and then maybe I can share those. But yeah, Palestinian Christians, are enduring and are finding ways of living, and and growing. And there's Bishop Yunan, that's him there. And yeah, they still have a sense of hope, but there's a lot that they, are asking of us. They, saying that we owe them solidarity, we owe them support, which they have not received, from the Western Church at large. That we're in a really, they kept reminding us how powerful of a position we are as a Christian constituency in the US to make our voices heard, to apply pressure on our state, to then apply pressure on Israel to simply comply with international law. And our church, so many of the things they were asking of us, our church is like already doing. And that was really wonderful to get to say and represent and talk about the work of the Peacemakers, and what our church has already agreed to, and what we're moving forward into, was really heartening to be able to share. Like they were really encouraged by it, as well as me just getting to be proud for our folks. So yeah, I'll stop there. And yeah, does anybody have like any questions on any of that?
Yeah, quick question here, Connor. is we noticed when we were in Los Angeles that the watermelon is a symbol that is used. Would you comment on that? And if it appears where you visited as well?
Yeah, it does. You know, like there are a bunch of places still where you can't fly the Palestinian flag,
Right.
even in the occupied West Bank. And so the watermelon has been a symbol, both because Palestinians love watermelon and we got served it all the time, and it became a symbol of, you know, the same colors of the Palestinian flag. And so, you know, you'll see that symbol all over the place, as a way of gesturing towards Palestine, in a, you know, here it's kind of, it sort of points out that history of suppression of Palestinian identity, you know, and national rights. And so, but still in there, it's still something that sort of actually has to be used because they can't fly the Palestinian flag, but you will see the Israeli flag all over the place, you know, throughout Palestine and, you know, wherever the settlements are, as like you know, a symbol of, you know, a really visible sign that it's being settled. And because they want you to see it taking place. They want to see like the growth, you know, like, because if it was just houses and you didn't really know who lived there, whether they were Jewish or Palestinian or not, it wouldn't have the same psychological effect of seeing like, oh, there's more, there's another one, and now there's another one, and that was just demolished, and now there's another one. So having the Israeli flag out there is a way of showing, you know, that settlement is expanding.
I have to take the room for sleep in 2 minutes. I gotta get together.
Any other questions? Anything that was like maybe even just particularly interesting? Like maybe you don't have a thought or a question, but like maybe you hadn't heard.
Where are the Palestinians going who are being expelled from these areas that you've you know, briefed us on? Where are they going?
Yeah, a lot are going to the US. I feel like most of the people that we talked to said that they had, family in the US or connections there. People go into Jordan. I mean, everyone that I talked to in Jordan was a Palestinian, Jordanian. And you know, obviously they're in Lebanon and in Syria and some in Egypt. So I'm not sure like what the specifics of that are, or how difficult or easy it is to get over there. But yeah, I don't know what the process is, but I know that that's where they're going.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for this, Connor. So I guess sort of the overarching questions I have are like, you mentioned international law. So what is, there's the not following the law for the people who are you know, in Palestine. And then there's the question of the increasing numbers of settlers. So what I guess, what are the means that we have as a church to put pressure on Israel to, you know, to change what it's doing? That's a very basic question, and I realize it's huge, but it's you know, they know what the law is, they're just not following it, and they're adding and they're creating more facts on the ground by putting more and more people on the land, and no one is stopping them. I mean, not saying the Palestinians are attempting to stop them. They are obviously through their actions and putting their own bodies on the line, they are attempting to stop them. But I guess in the circles that you were talking to, what were they asking U.S. Christians to do?
Totally. No, that's the perfect question. Yeah. I mean, asking for, I think relationship is like one of the fundamental things. Like that was so cool to see that church had like a partner church, kind of like we have in Cuba with La Fernanda. Like that kind of paradigm would work really well in Palestine too. So that, you know, so when their place got raided, that church was able to write to an ambassador, a U.S. ambassador, and have that ambassador go and visit the site And so I don't know what that's going to actually translate into at the end of the day, but that's like a little bit of leverage and a little bit of power that we might not think that we have. But like if we had that kind of relationship and it was in Hebron and it was somewhere else and we had a connection with the church and we could write to our representatives and have them do something, even just like attention on this issue is the thing, right, that Israel has escaped for so long. And that's right, obviously what's shifting the conversation about it culturally at the moment. And so in every way that we can just bring eyes onto it, right? Because it's not, right? I mean, some of the geohistorical, political, whatever, like dynamics can be complicated, but at the end of the day, what's just happening is not. And so when you go and see it, it really changes folks. So I think both like developing our own awareness and consciousness through having relationships with people where we can make specific asks of our representatives because we know people and have relationships, where we can send resources, whether that's financial or otherwise. One of the things that a lot of folks were asking for was presence, like our physical presence. Like when US folks are there, the settlers know it and they don't attack in the same ways, right? So it's called accompaniment, and there's been other iterations of this and other conflicts around the world. But have people in these different places, it sort of tempers what settlers are comfortable with doing. So pretty much everyone we talked to had some kind of program and like quarters for housing people to come stay with them. So that's, a way to just show up and just be there and like develop relationship and worship with them and keep them from, keep settlers from doing some of their more. But then, it's things like what we've already been doing, right? Like we've made statements, we've put our foot down, at least on the occupation, like generally, not a radical position, but one that, to actually express and affirm, like means something in a cultural conversation, that just likes to brush the stuff under the rug and just not even talk about it. Our obviously General Assembly, this week passed 4 pieces of legislation around divestment from companies that are, complicit in the occupation, from Israel itself, Israel bonds, complicity in Christian Zionism, like a number of things. And a bunch of our folks testified on those resolutions and were able to get them passed unanimously because because the testimonies were so powerful, and that's like where sentiment is at the moment. So we had someone from the Israel Palestine Mission Network come and speak at our BDS panel, boycott, divestment, sanctions. That's, you're aware of that and something we could align ourselves with more deeply. But yeah, like even though, the church, the PCUSA kind of has a good amount of money, a few billion or whatever. And it's not crazy money, but Netanyahu took notice of it when we first divested, and he called the move disgraceful, and it made international media because he was talking specifically about the Presbyterian Church, the PCUSA. And so it has an effect. Even some of these things where you might think, oh, what's $5 billion? They make 600 billion a year, like but that does have an effect on shaping the moral contours of the conversation, and applying that moral pressure on folks to say, like, yeah, maybe you have the guns to do it, you have the bombs to do it, but like you're not going to have any friends. Like people aren't going to continue to support you. And then materially, like it's just going to be too expensive for companies because people won't invest in them and they won't buy their products if they're over there. And Israel hopefully eventually will have to say, like, we can't sustain an economy because, right, this is, hopefully we'll go the way of South African apartheid. This leverage, the economic leverage was the thing. So I think we have a role as a church in all of that, in consciousness raising through relationship, through educational spaces like this, by hosting stuff, and by making statements, being specific about our positions, and developing legislation that that makes clear like what we think about Israel and divests from it, as long as these are its practices.
That's what's necessary.
Thank
So
you.
Connor, my brother was in Peace Brigades International, and he escorted people in Guatemala and then later in Colombia who had been threatened by death squads. And that is an organization that does that kind of accompaniment work. Are there organizations currently that are operating in the West Bank? Like that, or is that only in certain countries in Latin America? I just looked them up and it doesn't look like they've expanded beyond Honduras and Guatemala and a couple other places. But do you know of any groups that people can go and accompany or just be present?
Right. Yeah, that I don't. And that's what most of my conversations with people since my trip have been about, is about developing precisely that sort of thing. Like there are the one-off places, like we know we know Tent of Nations, we know Seil, and they like kind of facilitate that, but that's not like, they're not an organization dedicated to that specific function. And I've been talking with a lot of folks about like what it would look like, especially within the PCUSA, to have a presence there and to develop a ministry on the ground in Palestine that does precisely that. So I don't know of anything at the moment, but there's a lot of energy around building something like that.
Hey, Connor,
Peace Brigade. I put the Peace Brigade's website in the chat just in case you want to look at it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
What's up, Bill?
Yeah, I'm wondering, you'd mentioned, you'd mentioned a couple of resolutions that have been passed by, I guess it was PCUSA on divestment.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I lost my picture here. Do you have, I mean, I suppose we could just look them up. I'm just interested in reading them and maybe having copies of them so people at the church can read them too.
Totally. Yeah, I'll do like a follow-up email to this. And
Okay, great. Yeah.
It was really important to have 3 or 4 people from First Church testifying. That was really nice to see how many people from our church were in the testimony this past week.
Yeah, it was really cool to see.
Where was that?
It was in Salt Lake City, but we were there virtually.
Awesome.
Yeah, we spoke to the committees first last week before they came in, brought the different things to Salt Lake City.
You can't see me or not. You can't. Yeah.
I'm trying to send myself a little video from my phone to the computer. Let me just show you 2 things real quick, if I can.
Okay, there you go. That'd be fine. I know she has gotten me. I know she does.
So this is from a friend who I met there, and he stayed around, another Christian from New Zealand actually, and he stayed around, and yeah, it's super brief, but it's just another like experience of this sort of thing. So he's staying with a Palestinian family doing this kind of accompaniment work and interacting with these settlers who come up armed and try to push people off their own land. So that there's also another another image. Let me see.
Perfect. Yes.
So it's also these are photos of like the vehicles that they were thrown into, and they were taken for questioning for multiple days. And so they, so this is just Palestinians living on their own land, and some, some folks from the outside being there with them. And so the settlers come up and start harassing them. Then the police come, the soldiers come and throw them into these cars and take them for questioning for days in Palestine, just for existing on their own land. Right. So this is just to show you, like, it's not like it's every day, it's not like this just happens every once in a while and there's, it's survivable. It's like that's the kind of impunity and constancy of the violence of the occupation. Just sort of, yeah, every day dealing with settlers and with the police who are going to come support them. So then I want to show you this. It's a little longer. It's like I made it, and the song is kind of, I don't know, it feels like a little corny or something, but it's just like the only thing that fit with the time, like the amount of time. But is like a bunch of clips from my trip. So you can actually like see some of the people that I'm talking about and places I'm talking about. And yeah, it might be helpful for, yeah, just giving some flesh and bones on what I was talking about.
Stand up tall. This is a wake-up call. Never again, never again means never again for all. To all my people in Gaza, though we're living far from each other, though pain is my own pain. Free Palestine, free Palestine, Palestine, normalize. Free Palestine.
Yeah.
It's our destiny. Gotta make a choice, better be on the right side of history. No one can be free till we all are free. Enough is enough. We gotta stop each other's side. Free Palestine. Free Palestine. Free Palestine. Normalize. Free Palestine.
Yeah. So I don't know if you were able to like kind of pick out any of the things, that I'd referenced. You could see things like the settlements around Tent of Nations and the little RV there that was like right at the edge of their property, things like that. But yeah, any other questions or thoughts? Because I'm happy to close down. We'll try to keep these things to about an hour.
So Connor, quick question. Were
Mhm.
you ever in Israel proper, or was all of that in the West Bank and all of those Israeli flags are flying in the West Bank as if they just own it?
Yeah, all of it was the West Bank. We never went to Israel. Yeah, every checkpoint we went through, it's all Israeli security, but we never went into Israel. So all the soldiers, all the settlers, everyone is there illegally. Even the checkpoint that we came in through Jordan, but the checkpoint there on the border of Jordan and the West Bank was an Israeli, like immigration checkpoint. So yeah, everything that we saw, was illegal under international law. And I guess I ventured over into the Jewish quarter of of Jerusalem. And so I guess for a second, like I get that's Israel proper, but everything that you saw was all Palestine.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. The proposed two-state solution, how does Bethlehem? How does Bethlehem and the east and west, how does that fit into the proposed structure?
Yeah, I mean, part of the issue, I mean, there isn't like a concrete proposal, at least that I know of, of something that actually has tried to figure out what this would look like practically. But the suggestion that you can sort of just bifurcate the land of Palestine into two states, like cut it in half, in the middle, and then half of it's going to be Palestine and half of it's going to be Israel. Like everyone is so intermingled with one another, at least from the other side, right? I mean, there's lots of Israeli Palestinians who have been there since 1948, but they're a small proportion of the population. So yeah, like when you look at the whole land of Palestine, it's like Israel, and then this little like Swiss cheese piece that is the West Bank, and it's so unclear. Like, so if there's 120,000 settlers in Bethlehem, like what are you supposed to do? Those people have lived there now for like since 1967, for a generation or two. So you go and forcibly expel them. Like what's that supposed to look like? Yeah, so it's not clear. Like that's sort of the whole point, and why the two-state solution is something that keeps being bandied around as a solution, but it's like materially though, what is that supposed to look like? And then every option that's been offered to the Palestinians so far has been one that doesn't include sovereignty over borders, over the air or water, or security, like and something that Israel will always be sort of choking in various ways, and it won't be able to stand on its own 2 feet and look Israel in the eye, as it were. It will be of subordinate status, and that's all that's ever been offered. And so yeah, so what would a two-state look like? I mean, I don't know anyone who I like really respect their like political acumen who like continues to trot that out. All the Palestinians we talked to felt that was a dead solution, precisely because of Israel's occupation and like Marta was saying, the new facts on the ground. But one state, something that doesn't force the settlers to leave from where they are, perhaps they will want to leave if they no longer have the privileges and supremacy that have made their lives so comfortable, right? If you have to live like nearby a Palestinian and there aren't separate roads that you get to take to get straight into Jerusalem that Palestinians can't take. There aren't walls that separate you from seeing Palestinians, and you actually have to live around them. Maybe they won't want to live there anymore, So there are ways in which even a one state may have the incidental effect of actually having some of the Jewish settlers go back to Israel proper. But, whatever the case, like Palestinians are looking for human rights, and so some take a maximalist position, which I deeply respect, which is, the right of return. And we need to be able to, in that, the Seil, the right of return is guaranteed under international law. And that's what they believe in. Like, we need to be able to go back to what is, pre-1967 Israel and return to our homes. And if that was respected, right, which is a right under international law, how many Jewish folks, settlers, Zionists would still want to live there alongside Palestinian neighbors? As I left, one of the really amazing folks that I got to interact with was someone named Sam Munayer, who's a young guy, theologian, Christian guy, and he said something. I was talking to Sam and Allie about this the other night, and he said something about, and he didn't explain this, but he said, he was like, we need to settlerize the indigenous and indigenize the settlers, which he didn't fully unpack, but I think it has something to do with making sure that the indigenous folks, Palestinians, can settle, as it were, can move freely anywhere they want in these territories in the same way that Israeli settlers can. And then that settlers have to take some responsibility for this land as their own, right? But alongside other people. Like, you are indigenous too. We are both indigenous here together. So you don't just get to be a different category, right, of supremacy, different rights, whatever, this nation that's just for you and not for, like, actually integrating them into a new Palestine that incorporates all the Jewish people who are there and all the Palestinian Muslims and Christians who are there. And I thought that was a really interesting take, and one that for him is deeply theologically grounded, and one potential way forward. But what the task at hand, they kept reiterating, is not to just go out and solve this problem. Like, Palestinians don't need Christians in the West to draw up a game plan and go hand it to them and say, hey, we figured it out for you guys. If you just do this and this, they're like, hey, get Israel to stop killing us and stealing our homes and incarcerating our children, right? And genociding us. Like, just make it stop and do your best to get them to comply with international law. And then we can talk about whatever the eventual kind of arrangement is, but just like stop the bleeding, right? Like, that really, like, people were not thinking in very theoretical terms about some utopian future, but like, presently, how do we mitigate the violence that we're experiencing? So I think our role at the moment is, again, not to find some branded solution to align ourselves with, but to do whatever we can to interrupt the violence of the occupation. And I think we're well positioned to do that. And I've been doing a lot of that already. So I'm really proud of our folks.
Do you think, like, economically, Connor, like with the whole divestment thing and everything they're talking about at the GA, like with the Presbyterian, like divesting, like that will help kind of just starve Israel? Like, is that like when Israel sees, what a pariah they've become and they just don't have our money and resources? Like, is that what they're thinking?
That's the thinking, right? That's the hope. There's been some impact, both materially, just in terms of direct finances and people who, are not going to, build a new factory there. There've been multiple instances of that over the last 9 months of companies that aren't going to invest in Israel. And yeah, but it also has this moral effect, being on some of these lists, these what do they call? There's like a name for them, when they're on these lists where people won't invest in them, like our bonds and stuff, like our where, yeah, so like just existing, you
Like
know,
a blacklist of some sort, like they're blacklisted.
right. There's got to be a better name for that. But
Yeah.
yeah, like, so yeah, these are the things that are happening and are having some sort of effect. But also, you know, they have really extremely powerful allies like the US that can keep them afloat, you know, even when their economy is tanked by 20% since the start of the war. You know, like the US is just going to keep coming in, and you know, even the most progressive folks that we seem to have in Congress or elsewhere, you know, are still going to show out and make sure that Israel gets its, you know, its dose. So I don't know, but it's kind of the only tool we have, you know, and it has enough effect, at least, that Israel is afraid of it, that it tries to criminalize BDS. It has tons of initiatives. There are many states in the US that have anti-BDS laws on the books, where it's illegal for you know, different funds, businesses, things like that to refuse to do business with Israel. And so there's a lot of work around trying to repeal some of those laws, to resist those laws which are trying to be imposed in other places. You know, there are things like the adoption of the IHRA, you know, definition of anti-Semitism that, you know, is really worth resisting. But you know, obviously Israel has so much sway over our politics. And so as much as we can kind of just use the language of fairness, you know, of just like, we don't let other governments like dictate our laws or accumulate this much wealth from us or hamstring us geopolitically or put us at,
Yeah, like having those conversations and just keeping that pressure on.
yeah,
Like, you know, when you look at, I forget who it is, the media people who like the like chief of staff or whoever who are at the microphones, you know, and just like for the journalists to actually keep pressing them on the same thing and recognizing that, you know, yeah, we don't do this to every other country. You know, we don't give them the same leeway.
If at some level, if we just normalized relations with Israel, like if we just treated it like a regular country, so much of what it does and is capable of doing would be undercut. But it just exists on this weird plane, you know, where it's the eternal victim and impossible to hold it accountable for anything it ever does. And the global community, you know, will try to do that, and we will step in every time and protect them. And so they don't have to change their behavior. So hopefully that will eventually become too costly and for the US. And so the US no longer becomes the shield for Israel. And then, you know, it just sort of has to behave itself and be a kind of normal country. And then at that point, the Zionist engine that drives it, if it's like, hey, you guys have to either be normal and like be a country or give up like this fanatical ideology, it's not clear if what people are going to choose. And it actually seems like they will continue to choose the fanatical ideology and make themselves even more of pariahs and, you know, really destabilize that state project. But it's sort of up to them to choose that. But it's also up to us to put that choice in front of them, because right now the choice is just do whatever you want. So yeah, I hope that that's where we're headed.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you all so much for supporting me, like, you know, just in general, like putting me in a position where I could go do something like that, and, you know, welcoming me back and hearing what I have to say. You know, I'm just so proud of this group. So amazing to get to represent us and witness to the work we've been doing to our Palestinian siblings over there. And there's so much work to continue to do. And yeah, I'm really excited about the way we're positioned to do it. So thank you all for coming out tonight. And yeah, I'm super happy to like sit down one-on-one with anyone who wants to keep talking about stuff, or if you have ideas to field that, and, you know, yeah, whatever. Let's just keep working.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Connor. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
Good night.
Good night, y'all.
Good to see all of you all.
Yeah.
Yes, you too.